Oki Nixukua. My name is Inge Gene Kinitaniko Pitaki. Welcome to my online Blackfoot grammar course. In this video, we take a more in-depth first look at the Blackfoot language. The Blackfoot language is not called Blackfoot in Blackfoot. The Blackfoot-speaking people have an indigenous name for their language. The names I have heard are Nitsipursin, which means real or original language, and Sixikepursin, which means Blackfoot language. And there are other names possibly as well. The language now has four main dialects, called Siksika, Kena, Apatrusipikani, and Amskapipikani. These dialects are associated with the four different Blackfoot nations belonging to the Blackfoot Confederacy. When using the term dialect, it's important to mention that we don't mean anything negative when we use the term dialect. A dialect just means a subvariety of a language. When two varieties of a language keep becoming more and more distinct over time, they ultimately become different languages. If you want to avoid the negative connotations of the word dialect, you can also say variety. A common criterion that's often used for the difference between a language and a dialect is whether the speakers can still understand each other. When the speakers of two varieties can understand each other, we say that the varieties are mutually intelligible, and then we generally say that these are dialects of one language. Once the varieties are no longer mutually intelligible, we can then say that they are now different languages. In the real world, the difference between language and dialect often has to do more with politics. Some people say that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. That's another way of saying that a language is a variety with power and political status. I have found when talking to Blackfoot elders that they always say they can understand Blackfoot speakers from all dialect areas, but that they can hear where a person is from by how they speak. So it seems to be true that the Blackfoot language has mutually intelligible varieties that we can call dialects. When I began to set up the digital dictionary, I spoke to people about how best to do it. And one of the questions I asked was, should we actually really have 4 different dictionaries for each separate dialect? Everyone I talked to said that that was not necessary, but some people said it would be good to mark words or expressions belonging to specific dialects. So that is what we did. The original territory of the Blackfoot language is a large area east of the Rocky Mountains, between the North Saskatchewan and the Yellowstone rivers. This map shows that area with some of the important Blackfoot sacred places as well. This map, made by a German scholar, shows the traditional territory in bright green and the present-day reserves in orange. It's a good way to visualize how much larger the territory was compared to the areas that are now set aside as reserves for the Blackfoot people. And the same also goes for other indigenous nations, of course. On this map, you can see the Blackfoot nations again. Starting from north to south, we first have the Siksika Nation east of Calgary. Then to the south, we have the Piikani Nation west of Fort Macleod. This is sometimes called Apatrusipikani, meaning North Piegan. To the east of that, we have the Kena Nation, also called Blood, located west of Lethbridge and north of Cardston. And then finally in Montana, we have the Amskapipikani, or South Piegan, or Blackfoot Feet Nation, east of Glacier National Park. In this video course, we will learn about the Blackfoot language from a linguistic viewpoint. We will learn about the sounds of Blackfoot and how they are different from English. We will learn about words and sentences in Blackfoot and how they are different from English and other European languages. I will always include the viewpoints of Blackfoot elders and fluent speakers of the Blackfoot language wherever possible, and try to find common ground between different ways of looking at the language. In the next few slides, I will illustrate how things that are often said by fluent speakers can help us understand the language better. The first thing that's often said by Blackfoot speakers is something like, the Blackfoot language is very descriptive. You can see that this is true in the word for snowy owl shown here. The Blackfoot word literally means white night announcer. So the name for this bird describes what the bird does, not just what he looks like. A few years ago, Elder Martin Heavyhead gave Blackfoot names for some of the places in the University of Lethbridge. This is the sign you can see when you enter the university library. The Blackfoot version of this word is ituch konimob manapist. If you take these words apart, it literally means the place where we find new things. A very good description of what we do in a library. Blackfoot speakers also often say something like, every word contains an action. Every noun has a verb inside it. Every word has a whole sentence or sometimes even a whole story inside it. A good example is the word for stirrup, sapikakiatsis. When you take this word apart, it literally means that which is used to put your foot into. So the Blackfoot word expresses the action associated with the object. Martin Heavyhead also gave a name to the Information and Research Assistance Desk. In this case, the name that he gave was much shorter than the English term. He basically treated it as a help desk and gave it the name Itespumutspi, which means the place where we get help. Here's another example. What really is a radio? A radio is something that you listen to and that can make sounds that are louder than a human voice. So a Blackfoot word for radio translates literally as what we listen loudly with. A final thing I want to mention that elders often say is that there is nothing more important than relationships. Everything is relational, and everything is about the relations we have with each other, with the land, and with the world around us. People also often talk about relational accountability. This concept of relationship is so important in Blackfoot that nouns that designate kinship and relationship terms are treated differently in the grammar than other nouns. In the next few weeks, we will learn exactly what those differences are, but here I will just give some examples without explaining them in detail. Words for relative in Blackfoot are often called relational nouns. Some examples are nixist, meaning my mother, nukusix, meaning my children, and nixukuex, meaning my relatives. Horses are very central to Blackfoot culture. So central that some horses are seen as relatives. If you ask a fluent Blackfoot speaker what the word for horse is, they will probably say ponokamita. That word is made up of two parts, the word for elk, ponoka, and the word for dog, imita or umita. It's often explained that when the horse first came to Blackfoot country, the people thought that it combined the speed and strength of an elk with the usefulness and loyalty of a dog. But when someone refers to their own horse, the one that they own, that is their partner, the horse they usually ride, a different word is often used. This word is often translated as mount or saddle horse. It is a relational noun, just like the words for mother and child that we saw on the previous slide. Just like these other relational nouns, this special word for horse must always have a possessive prefix. That means you always have to say whose horse it is, who it belongs to. The word itself is utas, but you will not find it said like that in a sentence. you have to say whose horse that is. So for instance, nutas, my horse, my mount, or kutas, your horse, your mount. And there even is a related verb, utasi, that means to own a horse. The horse is the only animal that is treated like a relative in Blackfoot grammar. What a cool language, eh? That's it for today. Kitakira matsinotziyo. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. You can find our online dictionary, story archive, resources, and recordings of almost 400 conversational phrases in 3 dialects on the Blackfoot Language Resources website at blackfoot.algonquianlanguages.ca.